The sound of applause still echoed through the glass hall when Richard Hale felt his vision blur. For a moment, he thought it was the stage lights. Then came the vertigo, sudden, brutal, like the floor had disappeared beneath him. He gripped the edge of the podium, forcing a smile as cameras flashed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he managed, his voice thin but confident, "it is an honor to open the new Hale Research Center, a promise to the future of medicine." He paused, blinking rapidly. The faces in the crowd were melting into one another, investors, doctors, journalists, all fading behind the throbbing in his skull. He took a step back, then another, and collapsed. The applause turned into chaos. When he woke, the world was white. The beeping of monitors pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. And for the first time in decades, Richard Hale wasn't the man giving the orders, he was the one waiting for answers. A young resident entered the room, voice measured but cautious. "Mr. Hale, you're in Hale General Hospital. You lost consciousness during your speech." "I fainted," Richard said, his tone sharp. "I've been under stress." The doctor hesitated. "It's more complicated than that," Richard frowned. "Then simplify it." The resident exchanged a look with the attending physician, who stepped forward. Dr. Sophia Lynn, late 30s, calm, meticulous, the kind of doctor who didn't speak until she was sure. "Mr. Hale," she began, "your tests show a severe abnormality in your blood counts. We ran additional panels to confirm. You have acute myeloid leukemia." The words landed like a physical blow. For a man who'd built an empire on precision and control, Richard suddenly felt both slipping through his hands. He blinked. "That's impossible. I've had checkups every year. It can appear suddenly," Dr. Lin said gently. "It's aggressive, but treatable with the right match." "Match? For a bone marrow transplant?" He let out a breath that was half a laugh. "You make it sound like ordering a replacement part." Dr. Lin didn't smile. "We'll begin donor typing immediately." Time is critical. That night, Richard stared at the ceiling of his private room, one of his own design, sterile and expensive. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who funded a dozen cancer wings now lay in one of them, stripped of power, reduced to flesh and numbers. His wife, Margaret Hale, sat silently by the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "You're going to be fine," she said, her voice trembling beneath composure. He didn't answer. Margaret continued, "They'll find a donor. You've saved countless lives through this hospital. It's your turn." Richard turned his head slowly. "You don't understand. I don't believe in turns." She looked at him, at the man she'd spent 30 years beside, and for the first time, she saw fear behind his arrogance. 3 days later, Dr. Lin returned with a folder in her hands. "Mr. Hale, we've run the first round of compatibility tests." He leaned forward, impatient. "And no matches in the National Registry. But we're expanding the search." "Then expand faster." "We are," she said, choosing her words carefully. "However, there is something else." He caught the hesitation instantly. "Say it." She looked down at the paper. "Our records show you listed no living children." "I don't," Richard said flatly. She nodded slowly. "We'll need a detailed family history regardless. Even distant relatives can increase compatibility odds." "I already told you, Mr. Hale," she interrupted, tone quiet but firm. "Your chances improve significantly if we can test anyone related by blood, even one generation removed." He stared at her long, cold, unblinking. "Doctor," he said finally, "there is no one else." But even as he said it, an old name clawed its way through the silence. Ethan. It had been 24 years since he'd last seen her. Anna Walker, the woman who had once made him believe he could be someone other than Richard Hale. He'd ended it with a signed check and a threat of silence. He'd told himself it was mercy. He'd told himself she'd move on. He'd never asked what became of her. He didn't want to know, but he remembered the letter that came months later unopened, returned to sender, and the faint rumor whispered through his old circles. She had a son, Mr. Hale. Dr. Lin's voice pulled him back. "Is there anyone at all you haven't mentioned?" He opened his mouth to say no, but the lie caught in his throat. For the first time in years, he hesitated. "Run the registry again," he said finally. "There must be someone." Dr. Lin watched him for a long moment. "Of course," she said quietly. "We'll continue the search." Later that evening, when Margaret left for home, Richard pulled his laptop closer. He typed a name he hadn't spoken in decades. Anna Walker obituary. She had died 5 years ago. Small-town clinic nurse, single mother, survived by one son, Ethan Walker, paramedic, age 26. Richard leaned back, staring at the screen. The irony was suffocating. A paramedic, the son of the man who built hospitals too expensive for most people to enter. He closed the laptop and covered his face with his hands. The next morning, Dr. Lin returned, holding a new file. "Mr. Hale, we ran an expanded search. We may have found a potential donor, a 99% halal match." He looked up sharply. "Who?" She hesitated. "Ethan Walker." The room fell into silence. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. Dr. Lin continued softly. "He's local, works at STT, Agnes Medical. We haven't contacted him yet. I wanted to speak with you first." Richard stared at the floor, his jaw tightening. How sure are you?" 99%, she said. "He's your biological son, isn't he?" The question landed like a scalpel to the chest. He said nothing. That night, Richard sat in darkness, the machines humming softly beside his bed. The city outside glowed indifferent, eternal. He thought about the years he'd spent building walls around his mistakes, buying silence, rewriting truth. Now those walls were collapsing not from scandal, but from the simplest thing of all, blood. He whispered the name aloud for the first time. Ethan. It sounded foreign, fragile, like a word spoken through glass. For the first time in his life, Richard Hale realized the cost of every choice he'd made, and that the only person who could save him was the one who had every reason not to. Ethan Walker had seen a lot of blood in his life. It came with the job. Paramedics learned early that blood was just another kind of language. Fear, pain, survival, all written in red. But that night, on the back of an ambulance parked under the rain-soaked glow of a streetlight, it didn't feel like work. It felt personal. He didn't know why. The patient in front of him, a middle-aged man with a faint pulse, reminded him of someone he'd spent years trying not to imagine. "Ethan, you good?" his partner, Marco, asked. "Yeah," Ethan muttered, finishing the line. "Just thinking." "You? Thinking? That's new." Ethan smirked faintly. "Shut up and drive," Marco chuckled, climbing back into the driver's seat. "Copy that, philosopher," the siren wailed, slicing through the storm, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere, somewhere between curiosity and an ache he didn't have a name for. Back at STT, Agnes Medical, their lights were as merciless as ever, bright, humming, unforgiving. Ethan cleaned up, grabbed his jacket, and was halfway through clocking out when the triage nurse waved him over. "Walker," she called. "Someone's here to see you." He frowned. "At this hour?" She said. "It's about a medical matter." He blinked. "That's ironic." The nurse pointed toward the waiting area, where a woman in a dark coat stood, clutching a file. Her posture was precise to calm for someone waiting in an emergency room. Ethan approached slowly. "You looking for me?" The woman turned. "Ethan Walker?" "Yeah." She extended a hand. "Dr. Sophia Lin. I'm from Hale General Hospital." The name hit like a static shock. He didn't take her hand. "What's this about?" "It's about your father." The words made his stomach twist, a reflex more than a reaction. He forced a laugh. "You've got the wrong guy." She didn't flinch. "Richard Hale. He's ill." Critically, Ethan's expression darkened. "You mean the Richard Hale? The billionaire hospital guy?" "Yes." "Well, that's tragic," he said flatly. "But what does that have to do with me?" Dr. Lin opened the file. "DNA registry confirms a 99% match. You're his biological son." He stared at her for a long moment, eyes narrowing. Then he stepped back. "Nice story. You should try Hollywood." "This isn't a mistake," she said evenly. "We verified the data twice." Ethan's pulse quickened. He felt the heat crawl up his neck, the old anger resurfacing like a bruise pressed too hard. Listen, Dr. Lin, right? I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but the man you're talking about, he doesn't have a son. Dr. Lin's voice softened. He does. He just never claimed him. He looked away, jaw tight. You should leave. She hesitated. Ethan, he's dying. Acute myeloid leukemia. You're the only compatible donor. The words froze him mid-step. She continued, without a bone marrow transplant, he won't survive the next month. Ethan turned slowly. So now that he's dying, he remembers I exist? He doesn't know I'm here, she said. I came on my own. That caught him off guard. Why? Because I've seen patients die without closure. And because sometimes saving a life isn't about deserving it. He studied her face, steady, sincere, unshaken. Do you even know what he did? He asked quietly. I don't need to, she said. I just know what you could do. He laughed bitterly. You sound like one of those motivational posters. I'm a doctor. I deal in facts, not comfort. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. I should go. I'll leave you my card, she said, slipping it into his hand. In case you change your mind. He didn't look at it. When she walked away, the rain started again, tapping softly against the hospital windows. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, until Marco's voice broke the silence. Who was that? Ethan shoved the card into his pocket. No one. Back at his apartment, Ethan sat in the dark. The only light came from the city outside, filtered through half-closed blinds. He took the card out. Dr. Sophia Lin, Hematology, Hale General. The name stared back at him, along with a phone number he already knew he wouldn't call. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking in the glass. Richard Hale, he whispered, testing the sound of it. It felt dirty in his mouth, like something that didn't belong to him. He remembered his mother's voice, soft but steady. He wanted a legacy, not a family. You were never part of his plan. Ethan finished the drink in one swallow, then poured another. He didn't sleep. Meanwhile, at Hale General, Richard Hale sat in the darkened office adjoining his suite, reading the same file Dr. Lin had handed him that morning. He'd read it 10 times already. Ethan Walker, age 26, paramedic. The photos were low resolution, pulled from a personnel database, but the resemblance was undeniable. Same eyes, same stubbornness in the jaw. Margaret stood behind him, arms crossed. You never told me. There was nothing to tell. You had a child. He didn't look up. A mistake, her voice cracked. A mistake that could save your life. He shut the folder. He won't do it. You don't know that. I do, he said flatly. He has every reason not to. Margaret's eyes filled with something between anger and disbelief. Then at least ask him. Richard finally met her gaze. You think a lifetime of silence can be undone with one phone call? Maybe not, she said softly, but dying without trying sounds worse. The next day, Dr. Lin sat across from Richard in his hospital room. You didn't authorize me to contact him, she said quietly. I didn't need to. Well, I did, she replied. He looked up sharply. You what? I went to him myself. He refused. Richard's jaw tightened. Of course he did. Dr. Lin didn't apologize. I had to try. He exhaled slowly. You think this is some moral story, doctor? Some redemption arc? No, she said. But I think dying with unfinished business is a kind of hell. He gave a bitter laugh. You're too young to understand hell. Maybe, she said, standing. But you're too proud to survive it. That evening, Ethan sat in his car outside Steedy. Agnes, the radio off, the card still in his hand. He'd tried to throw it away 3 times. Each time, it found its way back to him. He closed his eyes, hearing Dr. Lin's words again. Sometimes saving a life isn't about deserving it. He didn't want to care. He shouldn't. But the thought of letting someone die even him twisted something deep inside. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, frustration spilling out in silence. Then he dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Dr. Lin speaking. Ethan hesitated. It's Ethan Walker. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. Thank you for calling. Don't thank me. I haven't said yes, I know, she said. But you didn't say no either, he exhaled. If I come in, it's not for him, understood, it's for my mother, he said quietly. I'll see you tomorrow, she replied. That night, Richard dreamed for the first time in years. He was standing in the old clinic where he'd met in a sunlight through dust, her laugh echoing like memory. And then, her voice, "You can build all the hospitals in the world, Richard, but some things you'll never be able to fix." He woke with tears in his eyes, his chest aching from more than just illness. The monitor beeped softly beside him, steady, mechanical, alive. He whispered into the empty room, "Ethan," and for a moment, he wasn't Richard Hale, the empire builder. He was just a man waiting for a second chance, one he might not deserve, but desperately needed. The lobby of Hale General Hospital didn't feel like a place for healing. It felt like money. Polished marble floors, glass walls, an atrium filled with artificial trees that pretended to be alive. Everything gleamed, everything except Ethan's mood. He stood there, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, the faint scent of antiseptic mixing with expensive air freshener. He'd been in dozens of hospitals, mostly the chaotic kind, full of sirens, noise, and human mess. This one felt sterile, like someone had surgically removed the soul from it. He almost turned back. Almost. "Mr. Walker?" He turned. Dr. Sophia Lynn was there, clipboard in hand, same calm precision as before. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would," he replied. "Let's just get this over with," she nodded. "Follow me." They walked through corridors where nurses moved silently, their shoes barely touching the floor. The hum of machines, the low rhythm of life being measured, the faint echo of monitors, it was all too familiar, yet distant. When they stopped in front of a room, Ethan froze. Through the glass wall, he could see a man sitting in bed, pale, thinner than the photographs Dr. Lynn had shown him. His face was drawn, eyes tired, but there was still a presence to him, an arrogance that illness hadn't erased. Richard Hale. Ethan's throat tightened. For 26 years, that name had been a shadow behind every insult, every absence, every unanswered question. Now, it had a heartbeat. Dr. Lynn's voice broke the silence. "He doesn't know you're coming." Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. "Perfect," she hesitated. "Do you want me to? I'll go in," he said, cutting her off. "Doctor." Lynn gave him a small nod. "I'll be nearby." The door opened with a hiss. Richard looked up, expecting a nurse. Instead, he saw Ethan, and for a split second, his mind refused to connect the face in front of him with the ghost from his past. Then recognition hit. His eyes widened. "Ethan," the name escaped like a prayer and a curse at once. Ethan didn't move. "You remember?" Richard swallowed hard. "Of course I remember." "Funny," Ethan said coldly. "You didn't when she was dying." Silence. Richard's hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. "I didn't know." "Don't," Ethan snapped. "Don't lie. You knew exactly what you were leaving behind." The older man's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed even. "You think I didn't pay for it every day?" Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "You paid? With what, your company's quarterly profits?" Richard's composure cracked. "You don't understand the world I lived in." "I couldn't." "You couldn't what?" Ethan cut him off. "Be seen with someone who didn't fit your perfect image? You couldn't love a woman who wasn't part of your empire?" Richard's voice rose, anger bleeding through his restraint. "I built this empire to save people." Ethan stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Then why didn't you save her?" The room fell into a heavy silence. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a quiet reminder that time was still moving for now. Richard's shoulders slumped. "She never told me she was sick," he said softly. "She didn't have to," Ethan replied. "You were too busy pretending she didn't exist." Richard's gaze drifted toward the window. "I made choices I thought were necessary." "Yeah," Ethan said. "We all do. The difference is, mine didn't destroy anyone's life." He turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped him. "You're here, aren't you?" "You came." Ethan froze. Richard continued, "Whatever you tell yourself, you wouldn't be standing in this room if you didn't care." Ethan turned slowly. You think this is about you? Richard's eyes met his. Isn't it? Ethan stepped closer until the space between them was filled with decades of silence. This is about her, he said quietly. Not you. Dr. Lin stood outside, watching through the glass, her expression unreadable. She could feel the tension vibrating through the air, years of buried history colliding in one small room. Margaret Hale appeared beside her, voice tight. He came? Dr. Lin nodded. He did. Margaret exhaled slowly. He looks like her. Yes, Dr. Lin said, but he sounds like him. Margaret's lips trembled slightly. Does he know who I am? I don't think he cares, Dr. Lin replied. Inside, Ethan had gone silent again, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Richard finally spoke. You don't have to do this, Ethan frowned. Do what? The transplant, Richard said. I know why you came to tell me to my face that I deserve this. To watch me die slowly, Ethan's jaw tightened. You think I want that? Don't you? Ethan hesitated. I don't want anything from you. Richard's voice broke, barely above a whisper. Then we're even. Dr. Lin entered quietly, her presence grounding the storm. We need to run preliminary tests, she said gently. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's just protocol. Ethan looked at her. You already know the results. I need to confirm them, she said. Officially, he exhaled. Fine. Richard looked up, disbelief flickering in his eyes. You're agreeing? I'm agreeing to nothing, Ethan said sharply. I'm just making sure you don't die without knowing what you did. Dr. Lin gestured toward the door. Follow me, Mr. Walker. Ethan turned to leave. As he reached the door, Richard's voice came again, hoarse, fragile. Ethan, I never wanted to hurt you. Ethan didn't look back. Congratulations, he said. You succeeded anyway. Then he walked out. In the hallway, Dr. Lin tried to read him, but Ethan's expression was stone. You handled that better than I expected, she said softly. He gave a hollow smile. That was better? She nodded toward the blood sample kit in her hand. For what it's worth, this could save his life, Ethan shrugged. Then I guess that makes us both hypocrites. Hours later, Richard sat alone in the dark, his foreline glowing faintly in the low light. He replayed every word Ethan had said, each one landing like a blade. He'd faced competitors, lawsuits, disease, but nothing had ever stripped him bare like that conversation. Margaret entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You should rest. I can't, he whispered. You saw him, she said softly. That's something. He closed his eyes. He hates me, maybe, she said, but he came. Richard opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling. Do you think that means anything? Margaret hesitated. It means he still feels something. And feelings can change. He gave a bitter smile. So can hearts. The next morning, Dr. Lin met Ethan in the lab for testing. He rolled up his sleeve in silence, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the steel tray beside him. You're quiet, she said, preparing the needle. Is that a medical observation or personal judgment? He asked dryly. A bit of both. He looked away. Just make it quick, she nodded, swabbing his arm. You remind me of him, you know. He turned sharply. Don't, I mean it, she said. Same stubbornness, same refusal to ask for help. He exhaled slowly. Then maybe I should run a test to make sure I didn't inherit that part. She smiled faintly. Too late. It's genetic. He almost laughed almost. As she labeled the vial, she said quietly, whatever happens, this is the start of something. Maybe not forgiveness, but truth. Ethan looked at the small tube filled with his blood. For some people, he said, truth hurts worse than dying. That night, in his office, Richard listened to the rain tapping against the window, slow, relentless. He reached for the phone, dialed a number he'd memorized earlier. Dr. Lin, he said when she answered. Yes, Mr. Hale. Did he complete the test? He did. Silence. And the match is confirmed. Richard closed his eyes. Thank you. She hesitated. He didn't do it for you, Richard. I know, he said quietly. But maybe one day he will. He hung up before she could respond. Outside, the storm raged on, cold, endless, cleansing. The sun hadn't yet risen when Ethan Walker walked back into Hale General Hospital. The building looked different in the half-light, quiet, almost human. Without the constant hum of voices, the walls seemed to breathe on their own. He stopped at the front desk. The nurse barely looked up. "Visiting hours start at 9. "I'm not visiting," he said. "I'm donating." She froze, then glanced at the name he scribbled on the form. Her expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something close to pity. "Dr. Lynn's on her way," she said softly. Minutes later, Dr. Sophia Lynn appeared, her lab coat half buttoned, a cup of coffee in hand. "You couldn't wait until morning?" she asked, half smiling. "I didn't sleep," Ethan said. "Neither did he," she murmured. "He's been asking for updates every hour, I bet," Ethan muttered. They began walking down the hallway together. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "I know, so why are you here?" Ethan hesitated. "Because I don't want to be him." She stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "I've spent my whole life hating a man for abandoning someone who needed him. If I walk away now, I'm no better." Dr. Lynn looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "That's not forgiveness," she said. "That's integrity." He gave a faint smile. "You always talk like that." Only before my second coffee, when they reached Richard's room, Ethan paused at the door. Inside, the older man sat up, pale and wired to more machines than he could count. He looked fragile, human in a way Ethan had never imagined possible. Dr. Lynn stepped aside. "Take your time." Ethan entered slowly. The air smelled of disinfectant and something colder, fear. Richard turned toward him. "You came back. Don't sound so happy about it," Ethan replied. Richard tried to smile. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm not here for you," Ethan said. "Let's make that clear." Richard nodded. "Then why?" Ethan pulled up a chair. "Because I've seen too many people die who didn't deserve it." "You do, but life doesn't work that way." Richard blinked. "You're agreeing to the transplant?" "Under conditions." "Conditions?" Ethan leaned forward. "You want my bone marrow? Fine. But you're going to earn it." Richard frowned. "This isn't a negotiation." "It is now," Ethan said. "I want the truth. About everything. Why you left. Why you pretended I didn't exist. Why you let my mother die thinking she was nothing." Richard's throat tightened. "Ethan, some things no," Ethan snapped. "No more excuses. You tell me the truth, or I walk out that door and you can watch your empire crumble from a hospital bed." The silence between them was heavy, suffocating. The monitor beeped softly, marking the seconds like a metronome for confession. Richard finally exhaled. "I was 28, he began. Ambitious, arrogant, already halfway to destroying myself. Then I met your mother Anna. She was light, real, the only thing that ever felt honest." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then why did you leave?" Richard stared at his hands. "Because I was afraid. My company was on the edge of collapse. My investors, my wife's family threatened to pull out if I didn't clean up my image. They found out about her. So you chose them. I chose survival," Richard said quietly. "But in doing so, I killed the part of me that deserved to live." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing. "You don't get to romanticize that. You left a woman alone to raise a child you never wanted." Richard's voice broke. "I wanted you." Ethan stopped. "Then where were you?" Richard closed his eyes. "Every day since, I've wondered the same thing." Ethan turned away, his hands trembling. "You had 26 years to fix this." "I tried once," Richard said. "She sent the letter back unopened." Ethan froze. "She? What?" Richard looked up. "She didn't want me near you. She said you deserved better." "She was right." Ethan stared at him, the anger flickering into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but confusion. "Why didn't you fight for us?" he asked quietly. Richard's voice was almost a whisper. "Because I didn't know how to fight for anything that didn't have a price tag." Dr. Lynn entered quietly with Margaret in tow. The tension in the room shifted instantly. "Margaret," Richard said softly. "Not now." "No, Richard," she replied, voice firm. "Now." She turned to Ethan. "I know who you are. I know what he did. And I'm sorry." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You don't owe me an apology." Yes, I do, she said. Because I stood beside him while he pretended you didn't exist. I let it happen, Richard tried to interrupt. Margaret, she silenced him with a glance. Don't. You've had your turn. Turning back to Ethan, she said softly, you remind me of her. Ethan's throat tightened. You knew my mother? Once, she said. She came to the hospital, pregnant, alone. I didn't know who she was then. But I remember her eyes calm, kind, stronger than anyone in that room. I've thought about that day ever since. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that doesn't demand words, only breathing. Richard's voice was small when it finally returned. You were right, Ethan. I don't deserve this. Ethan met his gaze. You don't? Then why are you still here? Ethan hesitated. Because she would have wanted me to be. Richard nodded slowly. Then maybe there's hope for both of us. Don't push it, Ethan said. A flicker of something like a smile touched Richard's lips. Fair enough. Dr. Lin cleared her throat gently. We'll need to schedule the transplant for next week. We'll begin conditioning chemotherapy tomorrow. Ethan nodded. Whatever it takes. Richard looked at her. And what are his risks? Minimal, she said. He'll recover quickly. Your body, however, will take time to accept the graft. There are no guarantees, Richard exhaled. There never are. Ethan stood. I'll be ready. As he turned to leave, Richard called out. Ethan, he paused. I don't expect forgiveness, Richard said. But thank you. Ethan didn't look back. Don't thank me. You haven't earned it. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in the hospital courtyard. The sky was a bruised gray, the fountain in the center reflecting the glow of distant streetlights. Dr. Lin found him there, arms crossed, staring into nothing. Rough day, she said softly. He gave a small laugh. You could say that. You did good in there. I didn't do it for him. I know, she said. You did it for closure. He looked at her, his voice lower. Do you think that's possible? Closure? She considered. Not always, but sometimes we find something better. Peace. Ethan exhaled slowly. Peace feels like a luxury I can't afford. Maybe not yet, she said, but it's coming. In his room upstairs, Richard watched the same sky through the window. Margaret sat beside him, silent. You think he'll go through with it? She asked. He will, Richard said. He's too much like her not to. Margaret nodded. And you? What about me? Will you change if you live? He looked away. That depends on whether I deserve to. She took his hand gently. Deserving has nothing to do with it. The next morning, as the first rays of light touched the city skyline, Dr. Lin reviewed the schedule for the transplant. 2 lives, 1 ending, 1 saving, both written in the same bloodline. She paused, staring at the patient list. For a brief second, she saw beyond the names and numbers. She saw the story unfolding between them. 2 men, 1 disease, and a debt that no medicine could cure. She whispered to herself, let's hope blood really can heal what pride destroyed. The hospital never truly slept. It only dimmed its lights and whispered softer. In the pre-dawn hours, Hale General pulsed quietly under the glow of sterile fluorescence. Monitors beeped in distant rooms, footsteps echoed down polished corridors, and the faint scent of disinfectant hung in the air like static. For Dr. Sophia Lin, mornings like this always carried weight of fragile stillness before the storm. She stood at the nurse's station, flipping through charts, but her thoughts were elsewhere. 2 names kept pulling her attention back to the same page. Richard Hale, Ethan Walker, father and son, donor and recipient. Wounds and salvation written in the same DNA. She closed the folder slowly. Let's begin, she whispered. Down the hall, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed in the donor prep room, wearing a thin hospital gown that somehow made him feel smaller. He hated hospitals, the smell, the lighting, the quiet hum of waiting. Now, he was trapped in one. A nurse tightened the blood pressure cuff around his arm. You okay, Mr. Walker? Define okay, he muttered. She smiled faintly, trying not to show pity. You're doing a good thing. He looked away. Tell that to the part of me that wants to walk out that door. Dr. Lin entered just then, her expression calm but purposeful. You still can, she said softly. No one's forcing you. I know, Ethan replied. That's why I'm staying, she nodded, impressed by the quiet resolve in his tone. We'll start the collection soon. Try to relax, Ethan chuckled dryly. Relax? Sure. You got a playlist for that? Dr. Lin smiled. I'll see what I can do. In another wing, Richard Hale was being prepped for chemotherapy. The once powerful man, the one whose name adorned every corridor, now sat pale and hollowed, his veins mapped in blue against his skin. Margaret stood beside him, silent but steady. The nurse adjusted his for a line. Richard broke the silence first. You'd think owning the hospital would get me better pajamas. Margaret smiled weakly. You can buy comfort, Richard, but not dignity. He gave a faint laugh that turned into a cough. Touch, she hesitated. Do you want me to call him? He shook his head. No, let him do his part without my shadow hanging over him. Margaret's eyes softened. You sound like a man who finally understands humility, or a man who's run out of options, he said quietly. Hours passed. Ethan lay still as the machine beside him hummed softly, extracting the stem cells from his blood. The process was long, draining, both physically and mentally. He watched the crimson fluid swirl through tubes and filters, disappearing into sterile bags labeled with a barcode. His blood, his DNA, his life being processed into salvation for someone who'd once denied his existence. Dr. Lin checked the monitor. You're doing well. Feels like I'm being bled for science, he muttered. In a way, you are, she said, smiling gently. But for a purpose, he exhaled slowly. You really believe this changes anything? I believe it gives both of you a chance to try, she replied. That's more than most people get. Ethan looked away. A chance doesn't mean forgiveness. No, she said. But forgiveness always starts with a choice. In the next operating room, Richard was being anesthetized, the overhead lights casting long shadows across his face. He'd insisted on staying awake through the early part of the prep, but his body was already failing him, fatigue clinging to him like smoke. Dr. Lin entered quietly, now wearing surgical scrubs. Everything ready? The attending nodded. All clear. She moved closer to the bed. Richard's eyes fluttered open as she adjusted his fore. Doctor, he said weakly, how's my donor? She met his gaze. Stubborn. Strong. Exactly what you'd expect. A faint smile touched his lips. He gets that from his mother, Dr. Lin nodded. Then he's in good hands. His eyelids grew heavy. Tell him I'm sorry. I think he already knows, she said. His breathing steadied, the anesthesia taking hold. The surgical lights came on like a sunrise, harsh, pure, unforgiving. Dr. Lin took her position, the instruments gleaming beneath the sterile brightness. Around her, the room became choreography, nurses, surgeons, anesthesiologists moving in a silent, precise rhythm. Richard's chest rose and fell slowly, the heart monitor tracing fragile life in green waves. As the transplant began, the world outside faded. Time stopped belonging to clocks. It belonged to heartbeats. In the donor room, Ethan's collection neared completion. He watched the bag fill with the deep, dark red of marrow-rich blood, the very thing his father's body needed to survive. When the nurse finally disconnected the line, Ethan's arm felt numb, his body lightheaded. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a strange calm. He stared at the bag as it was sealed and labeled. It didn't look like redemption. It looked like irony in liquid form. Hours later, Richard's transplant was complete. The surgical team moved with quiet efficiency, cleaning up instruments and removing drapes. Dr. Lin remained for a moment longer, watching the steady rhythm on the monitor. She whispered, almost to herself, "Live, damn it. Not for guilt, not for a legacy, for him." Outside, she met Ethan in the hallway. He was pale, leaning slightly on the wall, four still taped to his arm. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Smooth," she said. "No complications." He nodded. "Good. Then I'm done here. You should rest," she said. "I've been resting my whole life," he muttered. "Time to move." She reached out, stopping him. "Ethan, he asked me to tell you something," he sighed. "Let me guess." "Thank you." Her eyes softened. "He said he's sorry." Ethan's expression didn't change. "That makes one of us, in recovery." Richard drifted between dreams and feverish flashes, fragments of a life replaying in random order. Anna's laughter, the clinic where they met, Ethan's first cry, his own signature on a check that erased them both, and somewhere in that swirl of memories, he heard her voice. Forgiveness isn't given, Richard. It's earned in silence. He reached out into the dark, but there was only the beeping of machines and the cold touch of air. 2 days later, Dr. Lin checked his labs. The transplant had taken. The graft was holding. He would live, but the victory felt quiet, almost somber. When she entered Ethan's room with the update, he didn't smile. He just stared out the window, the city glimmering faintly beyond the glass. So, he's going to make it, he said flatly. Yes, he nodded slowly. Then I guess that's that. It doesn't have to be, she said. You could talk to him. I've said everything that needed saying, Doctor. Lin studied him carefully. You're afraid? He turned to her, surprised. Of what? That if you forgive him, you'll have to let go of the anger that's kept you alive. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. You sound like a therapist, she smiled faintly. Just a doctor who believes people can heal from more than illness. That night, the hospital was silent again. Ethan walked past his father's room, stopping only for a second. Through the glass, he saw Richard asleep, fragile, human, no trace of the empire left, just an old man suspended between guilt and survival. Ethan pressed his hand against the cold glass, not as a gesture of affection, but acknowledgement. You got what you wanted, he whispered. Now try to deserve it. Then he turned and walked away. Inside, Richard stirred, eyes fluttering open just enough to see a shadow disappear down the corridor. And for the first time in decades, Richard Hale cried. Not for the disease, not for the empire he might lose, but for the son who'd given him the one thing he couldn't buy, a second chance. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the procedure. It started as a fever, low, persistent, almost trivial. By evening, it had become a storm. Richard Hale lay in bed drenched in sweat, his skin pale and trembling. Monitors beeped in irregular rhythm, like a drummer losing tempo. Doctor. Sophia Lin stood at his bedside, eyes scanning the vitals with surgical focus. Temperatures climbing, the nurse reported. 104 and rising. Dr. Lin didn't look up. Increase fluids. Prep broad-spectrum antibiotics. Call hematology now. Richard stirred weakly, his voice cracked and raw. Is this supposed to happen? She met his gaze. Sometimes yes. Your immune system's rebooting. It's like lighting a fire, sometimes it burns too hot. He managed a faint smirk. Always did overdo things. Then he coughed hard, wet, painful. Blood flecked the tissue. Dr. Lin's composure didn't break, but her heart clenched. Stay with me, Mr. Hale. You've survived worse. Not like this, he rasped. Across the hall, Ethan Walker sat in the hospital cafeteria, half asleep over a cup of cold coffee. He was supposed to have been discharged that morning, but something, instinct, guilt, maybe both, kept him from leaving. Marco, his partner from the ambulance, slid into the seat across from him. You look like hell, Marco said. Thanks. Seriously, man. You could have been on a beach right now. Instead, you're still here, haunting the place. Ethan shrugged. Guess I'm not done yet. Marco leaned back. You really think this changes anything? You saved the guy, he lives happily ever after. You forgive him, credits roll. Ethan gave a hollow laugh. You've been watching too many movies. Yeah, well, life's not one either, Marco said. Sometimes you save the wrong person. Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe, but maybe saving the wrong person still means something. Hours later, Ethan was on his way out when he saw Dr. Lin running down the corridor, her expression tight. Something was wrong. Dr. Lin, he called out. She stopped, breathless. It's your father. The graft's fighting back, cytokine storm. We're doing everything we can. Ethan froze. Is he dying? Not if I can stop it, she said, then hurried off. He stood there, torn between instinct and resentment. For years, he'd imagined this moment, the man who'd caused him so much pain finally paying for it. He'd thought he'd feel vindicated. He didn't. He felt Hollow. He turned and followed her. Inside the ICU, the air was thick with urgency. Machines beeped faster, nurses moved like clockwork, and Dr. Lin barked orders without hesitation. Push methylprednisolone 1 gram 4. Now, prep for possible intubation. Ethan stopped at the doorway, watching through the glass. Richard's body convulsed weakly under the sheets, his face a mask of pain. For the first time, Ethan saw not the man who'd abandoned him but a man fighting for his life. Dr. Lin glanced toward the door, saw him there, and motioned him in. He hesitated, then stepped inside. Richard's eyes fluttered open just enough to find him. "Ethan," he gasped. "I'm here," Ethan said quietly. "I thought you left." "I almost did," Richard tried to smile, his voice a broken whisper. "Figures," Dr. Lin interrupted. "Mr. Hale, focus on breathing." Ethan looked at her. "Can I do anything?" "Stay where he can see you," she said. "Sometimes that's enough." The next hours blurred into white light and noise. Doctors rotated in and out. Medication dripped like time itself, slow, uncertain. At one point, Richard's heart monitor flatlined for 2 full seconds. Ethan's chest seized as if it were his own pulse that stopped. Then, a weak blip. Then another. He was still there. Ethan exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Dr. Lin gave a faint nod. "He's stabilizing." Ethan sank into a chair, exhaustion overtaking anger. "How much more can he take?" Dr. Lin's voice softened. "He's alive because of you. Don't forget that." He shook his head. "No, he's alive in spite of me." She studied him for a moment. "You know, sometimes the hardest part of saving someone is accepting that they might still disappoint you afterward." He didn't answer. He couldn't. 2 days later, the crisis passed. Richard slept most of the time, his body weak but recovering. When he woke, the first thing he saw was Ethan, asleep in a chair beside his bed. He stared for a long moment, barely breathing, then whispered, "You stayed." Ethan stirred. "Don't make a big deal out of it." Richard smiled faintly. "You sound like her." Ethan frowned. "Who?" "Your mother. She never stayed mad as long as she pretended to." Ethan leaned forward. "You don't get to talk about her like that." Richard nodded. "You're right. I forfeited that right a long time ago." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that carries too much history to fill with words. Later that afternoon, a new storm began, not in Richard's body, but in the media. News of his illness and the secret son who had saved his life had leaked. Headlines exploded. Hospital tycoon's hidden heir donates bone marrow. Richard Hale's redemption. Blood ties and scandal. Reporters swarmed the hospital lobby. Cameras flashed. Margaret Hale arrived to find chaos spilling into every corridor. She stormed into Richard's room, voice trembling with fury. "You told someone?" He looked confused. "No, I then who?" Dr. Lin entered, holding her phone. "Someone in the hospital leaked it. It's everywhere." Ethan appeared in the doorway, face pale with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." Margaret turned on him. "You think I wanted this?" Ethan shot back. "You think I did?" Dr. Lin raised a hand. "Enough. This isn't helping." But the damage was done. Within hours, reporters had camped outside Ethan's apartment, chasing a man who never asked for attention. Marco called him. "You're all over the news, man. You're trending." "Fantastic," Ethan muttered. "Always wanted to be famous for my blood." He hung up and sat in the dark. The silence felt heavier now, not peaceful, but suffocating. He grabbed his phone, hesitated, then called Dr. Lin. When she answered, he said, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Her voice was calm but weary. "No, Ethan. I hoped it wouldn't." "Well, it did," he said. "And now everyone knows who my father is." "Congratulations, Ethan." He ended the call. At the hospital, Richard watched the news in silence. He saw his son's face plastered across the screen, angry, exhausted, exposed, and he realized that once again, he'd ruined the one good thing left to him. Margaret stood behind him. "You can fix this." He turned to her, eyes hollow. "How?" "Tell the truth," she said simply. "For once in your life." The next day, Richard called a press conference against Dr. Lin's advice, against reason, against pride. He sat in front of the cameras, frail but composed. When the first question came, Mr. Hale, is it true you hid a son for 26 years? He didn't flinch. Yes, he said quietly. It's true. The room fell silent. I made a mistake that I've carried my whole life, he continued. I let pride and fear dictate who deserved my love. And when I finally needed it most, that love came from the son I never claimed. He didn't owe me anything, but he gave me everything. Flashbulbs popped. Questions shouted. But Richard didn't hear them. He stood, nodded once, and walked away. That evening, Ethan watched the recording alone. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to call it performative. But something in Richard's tone, the trembling, the sincerity, made him pause. He shut off the screen, staring at his reflection in the black glass. He didn't recognize the man looking back, not the paramedic, not the son, not the victim. Someone new was forming in between. He whispered to himself, maybe saving him was never about him. Outside, thunder rolled softly, as if the sky were exhaling. In her office, Dr. Lin finished her shift and stared at the closed door of Richard's room. Both men were alive, and yet, something fragile still hovered between them, unresolved. She wrote in her chart, condition stable, prognosis uncertain, then paused and added a line she'd never written in a medical record before, emotional recovery pending. She closed the file, exhaled, and whispered, let's see if they survive each other. The storm had passed, at least the kind that could be seen. The hospital had quieted, the reporters had moved on to fresher scandals, and the rhythm of Hail General returned to its familiar hum. But for Ethan Walker, silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. He sat in his small apartment, the blinds half open, the light of morning spilling across the floor in fractured stripes. The air was still, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet thud of his heartbeat. On the table sat a stack of unopened letters, charity requests, TV offers, interview invitations. Every one of them called him something he didn't recognize. The son who saved his father, a real-life redemption story. He stared at the headlines, jaw clenched. Heroes don't need therapy, he muttered bitterly. But the truth was, he hadn't slept properly in weeks. He woke to hospital beeps that weren't there, heard his father's voice in the silence, and felt guilt where there should have been relief. At Hale General, Dr. Sophia Lin checked Richard Hale's vitals. His numbers were improving, white cell count rising, color returning, strength building. Physically, he was healing. Emotionally, he was haunted. He spent hours staring at the window, watching the world move outside, as if trying to find his place in it again. Margaret came and went, silent most days. They'd learned the art of existing beside each other without words. When Dr. Lin entered with his latest lab results, Richard turned to her. You should discharge me soon, he said. I'm taking up space someone else needs. She studied him. You're not ready yet, he smiled faintly. Physically or morally? Both, she said, matching his dry tone. He nodded slowly. He hasn't come back, has he? She hesitated. No, Richard looked away. Can't blame him. You shouldn't, she said. But you should try to make it right. He gave a weak chuckle. How do you apologize for a lifetime? You start with a sentence, she said. And you mean it. That evening, Ethan sat in his car outside the hospital parking lot. He'd driven there without realizing it, muscle memory, maybe. He gripped the steering wheel, staring at the entrance like it was the edge of a cliff. Inside, he knew his father was recovering, alive, breathing. And yet, part of him still wanted to walk away and never look back. He closed his eyes. His mother's voice came to him not as a memory, but as something deeper. Don't carry other people's sins, Ethan. You'll drown before you save anyone, he exhaled sharply. Too late, Mom. Then he started the engine and drove off, but not home. He went to the only place that still made sense. The old clinic on the south side of town had closed years ago. The sign was faded, the walls covered in ivy, but Ethan still remembered every corner. It was where his mother used to work, where she met Richard Hale. Inside, The air smelled of dust and nostalgia. He walked down the narrow hallway, touching the walls like he was tracing her footsteps. He stopped at the old break room, the one with the cracked window and the rusted kettle still on the counter. He sat down, the chair creaking under him, and let the weight of everything finally fall. Tears came quietly, the kind that don't ask permission. For the first time since the transplant, he allowed himself to feel everything: anger, loss, love, confusion, all tangled in one unbearable knot. He whispered into the silence, "You'd hate what I've become, Mom, but I tried." Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Richard wrote his first letter in 20 years. His handwriting was shaky, the ink uneven, but the words came clear. "Ethan, I don't know how to fix what I broke. I don't even know if you want me to try, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Not for being sick, not for getting caught, for being a coward. You gave me something I never gave you, a chance. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. No expectations." Richard, he folded the letter carefully and handed it to Dr. Lin. "Will you deliver it?" She looked at him, then at the paper. "Are you sure?" "I've spent my life hiding," he said. "Time to do something different." 2 days later, Ethan found the envelope slid under his apartment door. No return address, no preamble, just his name. He almost threw it away. Then curiosity, or maybe pain, won. He read every word twice, then sat in silence for a long time, staring at the page. There were no lies in it, no manipulation, just truth, small, imperfect, human. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt tired. He folded the letter back, placed it on the table, and stared at the skyline through the window. Weeks passed. Richard was discharged, walking with a cane but standing taller than he had in years. He returned to his penthouse overlooking the city, the same place that once symbolized success. Now it just felt hollow. Margaret stayed for a few days, then quietly packed her things. "You're leaving?" he asked. She nodded. "You have to face this next part alone, Richard." He swallowed hard. "You think I can?" She smiled faintly. "No, but you'll try." That's new. He watched her go without protest. For once, he didn't chase what was already gone. One evening, as he sat in the dim glow of his living room, the doorbell rang. He opened it and froze. Ethan stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, expression unreadable. "I shouldn't have come," Ethan said. "Then why did you?" Richard asked softly. Ethan hesitated. "Because you wrote it down. That mattered." Richard nodded slowly. "Can I offer you a drink?" "Water's fine," Ethan said. They sat opposite each other, two men who shared blood but not history. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ethan broke the silence. "You ever think about how weird this is?" Richard smiled faintly. "All the time." Ethan leaned forward. "You don't get to fix this overnight. I know. You don't get to make me forget. I wouldn't ask you to. Then what do you want?" Ethan asked. Richard looked down at his hands. "A chance to know the man I should have been around to raise." Ethan studied him, the tremor in his voice, the vulnerability in his posture. It wasn't an act. It was real. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can forgive you. You don't have to," Richard said. "Just don't hate yourself for not hating me anymore." That line hung in the air, delicate, unexpected, painfully true. Ethan looked away, eyes burning. "You sound like her." Richard smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally learned something from her." Later, after he left, Richard stood by the window, watching the city lights blink like distant heartbeats. He didn't know if that conversation changed anything, but for the first time in decades, he felt lighter. And somewhere across town, Ethan drove in silence, replaying every word. Forgiveness still felt impossible but no longer unthinkable. A few weeks later, a small article appeared in the paper. Richard Hale Foundation announces new fund for pediatric oncology. Founder credits a personal debt he can never repay. Ethan read it at the ambulance station during a night shift. He didn't smile, but he didn't scoff either. He just folded the paper and tucked it into his bag. Marco noticed. "That about your dad?" "Yeah, you good?" Ethan thought for a moment. Getting there, Marco grinned. That's a start. Later that night, during a lull between calls, Ethan stepped outside. The city was quiet, rain glistening under the streetlights. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, breathing in the cold air. For once, it didn't sting. Somewhere, a siren wailed distant, fading. Life moved on. He whispered to no one, "Guess we both made it." Winter returned to the city quietly that year, not with storms, but with stillness. The kind that makes every breath visible, every sound sharper, every truth harder to avoid. Inside Hale General, the halls looked the same as ever, sterile, polished, and humming with the quiet rhythm of survival. But for Dr. Sophia Lynn, something had shifted. She'd watched these walls witness countless recoveries and countless failures, but few stories lingered like this one. Father and son, wounds and blood, loss and forgiveness, orbiting each other like planets unsure if they should collide or drift apart. She closed the file and looked out the window at the pale morning light, whispering to herself, maybe healing isn't about closure. Maybe it's about continuing. Ethan Walker hadn't been back to the hospital in months. He'd buried himself in work night shifts, trauma runs, emergency calls. The ambulance became his confessional, the city his penance. He told himself it was easier that way. No strings, no expectations, no ghosts. Until one night, his radio crackled with a call that froze him mid-breath. Critical cardiac event. Male, mid-60s. Address, 122 Park Avenue, Penthouse 3. He didn't need the rest of the details. He knew that address. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. His partner, Marco, said nothing, just a silent glance that meant, "You sure about this?" Ethan nodded once. When the doors opened, a housekeeper stood trembling near the entryway. "He just collapsed," she cried. "Please hurry." They found Richard Hale on the floor near the window, the same window he'd once stared through, searching for redemption in the city lights. His skin was pale, lips slightly blue, his breathing shallow and uneven. Ethan dropped to his knees instantly, instincts overriding everything else. "Pulse weak, BP dropping," he said. "Charge the paddles." Marco handed them over. Ethan hesitated for a half-second, just enough for memory to catch up. Then he pressed the paddles to his father's chest. Clear. Richard's body jolted. Once, twice. Then, faintly, the monitor beeped. He was alive. Ethan exhaled sharply, relief and confusion blending into something wordless. "Get him on the stretcher," he ordered. As they lifted Richard, the old man's eyes flickered open for a moment, enough to find his son's face through the haze. "Ethan," he whispered. "Don't talk," Ethan said firmly. "Save your strength." Richard smiled weakly. "You came." Ethan looked down at him. "Of course I did. It's what I do." Hours later, Richard lay in the ICU, hooked to monitors, breathing steady. Dr. Lynn entered quietly, surprised but unsurprised to find Ethan sitting by the bed. "You again," she said softly. He looked up. "Guess we're both bad at goodbyes." She smiled faintly. "He'll make it through the night." "Mild arrhythmia, likely stress-induced," Ethan nodded. "He never learned how to rest." "Neither have you," she said. He chuckled lightly, then grew quiet. "I thought I was done with all this." The hospitals, the past, him. Dr. Lynn leaned against the counter. "You were never running from him, Ethan. You were running from who you are when he's around." He frowned. "And what's that?" "Someone who still cares," she said simply. When Richard woke again, the room was dim. Ethan sat beside him, arms crossed, exhaustion in his posture. "Third time," Richard rasped. "You keep saving me," Ethan shrugged. "Bad habit." A silence settled, not heavy this time, but human. Richard's gaze drifted to the foreline. "Guess I owe you again." Ethan looked at him. "You don't owe me anything." Richard smiled faintly. "That's the first lie you've told me," Ethan sighed, looking down. "You really think saving you fixes anything?" "No," Richard said. "But maybe it's not about fixing. Maybe it's about not repeating." Their eyes met, father and son, mirrors reflecting time and regret. Richard whispered, "You remind me of her." Ethan smiled softly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Days turned into weeks. Richard's recovery this time was slower, gentler. Ethan visited occasionally, never for long, but always enough. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't need to. One afternoon, Dr. Lin found them sitting in silence by the window, watching the city. It was almost peaceful. She asked quietly, "How's the heart, Mr. Hale?" Richard smiled. "Mending, slowly, like everything else." Ethan smirked. "That's doctor talk for don't get cocky." Dr. Lin laughed softly. "You're learning." Richard glanced between them, something warm flickering behind his tired eyes. "Thank you," he said, "both of you, for not giving up on me even when I deserved it." Ethan looked away. "You didn't make it easy." "I wasn't supposed to," Richard said. "I just needed to make it right." Spring came quietly. The hospital courtyard bloomed with early magnolias, white against gray skies. Ethan walked beside Dr. Lin, hands in his pockets. "You ever think people like us get addicted to other people's pain?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "You mean empathy?" He smirked. "That's one word for it." They reached the edge of the garden. He stopped, watching a patient in a wheelchair being pushed by a nurse. "You think people really change?" he asked. Dr. Lin paused. "No one becomes someone new. They just stop pretending to be someone else." Ethan nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. That evening, Richard asked to see him one last time before discharge. When Ethan entered, Richard was sitting up, dressed, a small suitcase at his side. "You look like a man about to run away," Ethan said. Richard smiled. "Run? No, walk maybe." "There's a difference." Ethan crossed his arms. "Where are you going?" "Someplace quiet," Richard said. "I donated the penthouse, the company, everything that still mattered to anyone but me." "The foundation's in your name now." Ethan blinked. "What? It's yours." "Do with it what I couldn't. Help people without needing their gratitude." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to." "I do," Richard interrupted. "It's the only way I know how to say thank you." Ethan exhaled, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "You're impossible." Richard smiled softly. "So are you. Must run in the blood." They walked together through the hospital's front doors, sunlight filtering through the glass. Outside, the world looked different, not brighter, not softer, but real. Richard paused at the steps. "This is where I leave you," he said. Ethan frowned. "You could stay in the city." "I've spent enough time here," Richard said. "The world doesn't need another speech from me. It needs quieter men like you." Ethan stared at him for a moment, then extended his hand. Richard took it, their grip firm, brief, but full of unspoken years. No forgiveness, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. Richard turned and walked toward the waiting car. Ethan watched him go, his silhouette framed by sunlight. When he finally disappeared from view, Ethan whispered, "Good luck, old man." Weeks later, Ethan returned to work not as the man who'd been wronged, but as the man who'd survived it. In the ambulance mirror, he caught his own reflection, older, steadier. He adjusted the collar of his uniform and smiled faintly. The radio crackled. "Unit 14, possible cardiac arrest downtown." He grabbed the mic. Unit 14 responding. As the siren wailed to life, he looked out at the city, vast, imperfect, alive. For the first time, he didn't feel weighed down by his bloodline. He felt free of it. Later that night, the camera would fade on a view of Hale General from afar, lights glowing softly under the dark sky. Inside, Dr. Lin closed her last chart of the day. She paused before turning off the light and whispered, "Sometimes blood saves life, sometimes it saves the soul." The screen would fade to black. Then, faintly, the sound of a heartbeat. Steady, calm, human. The end.